Just do one question, and if we got a chance, we'll go in the second round. We will start it off with our leadoff hitter today is Patrick Murphy. Patrick, go ahead.
Ryan, scrimmage Saturday, just coming out of that first scrimmage, what thoughts you have, kind of where you feel like this team is coming out of what I assume was a big task?
You know, sometimes it's hard to tell. I think that we're growing. I think we still have work to do. There were things that I felt like we definitely improved with last week. There's still things that, you know, we got to get fixed. We got to get addressed. You know, coming out of the weekend, I felt like we were able to identify some guys that built some depth. Some position battles are still going to go on. You know, this is a big week to take the next step for us. And I think the effort's there. I think the overall execution's got to improve. You know, each side of the ball has their things that they need to grow upon. And, you know, this is kind of the last week to do that, because after this week, you know, we'll have our scrimmage on Saturday. You know, and it's not just, you know, complete Texas from there on, but like it's getting close. So, you know, we're still in the middle of it. You know, there was a lot of positives, but obviously some things we got to, I guess the best way to put it is in the first 9 practices, we got a lot done, but we got a lot to do.
Ryan, obviously, you would have rather had Andrew. You talked about those teams. What you see from them in the scrimmage, do you feel like you can adapt or just see more from them?
Yeah, Edric's been out there, but he hasn't, you know, hasn't had a full camp. So I'm seeing some other guys step up, which has been great. But you know, that battle is still going on. It's you know, something that Coach Johnson is addressing every single day. They know how important it is to step up, and you know, I think we're finding some guys that we feel like we can win with. The question is, you know, how many guys do we feel like can take on you know, the majority of the load and play at starter level and take on that type of a snap count. So we say it all the time, like, you know, you're either a pro or you're a player. If you're a player, that means you flash, that means you can do some things, but you're inconsistent. A pro does it the same way every single time. And that's the challenge. And we've seen guys flash. We need more consistency.
Ryan, in addition to leadership, we've talked about Julian's leadership and having to grow in that respect, and he has. In addition to that, where has he grown the most since last year, or maybe even since the spring?
Decision-making, you know, command of the huddle, timing, anticipating as opposed to reacting. You know, just, I think overall, just you feel like when somebody has, you know, taken a certain amount of reps, you want to see the progression and improvement. I think we're seeing that. And, you know, last year there were 5 quarterbacks. So those snaps, you know, got spread pretty thin. You know, now, you know, he and Lincoln are getting, you know, a lot of reps, and so they're improving. And that's, again, you talk about a pro or a player. You know, a pro remembers because he's done it before. A player is learning. And I think, you know, for him, he's starting to remember more because he's done a good job, you know, of getting mental reps too, because, you know, he's getting those physical reps now. But last year there was so many mental reps where he had to sit in the back and watch Will and Dev. But, you know, this year he's getting the physical reps. But because he put those mental reps in on the front end, you're seeing growth, you know, from both guys.
Building off of that, how did they look last week? You called it moving week. Did you see any separation from the two guys?
You know, there were positives on both ends. There were negatives on both ends. You know, I won't, you know, predict when we'll make this decision, but, you know, we're getting more and more information, you know, that we need to make a decision. You know, where it's at now, we'll let it continue to play out.
We'll go back row. Dan Holt.
Yeah, you mentioned last week Austin had been taking reps at left tackle.
Yeah.
A couple of players, you talked to Philip Daniels this past week. Where are things kind of at right now on both sides of that?
Yeah, you're seeing, you know, Ethan's playing tackle, moving to guard. You know, Tegra's playing guard, but, you know, he can bump out the tackle as well. You know, Austin, Phil, both playing tackle. You know, Luke is inside, Carson's inside, Josh Padilla's inside, Gabe Van Sickle's inside. You know, you're seeing Ian Moore play tackle. And so the idea of a primary and a secondary, I think, is going to really pay dividends down the road. But it's important as we get closer to this first game for guys to really dig in and get the majority of the snaps at where they're going to play. So, we're seeing Austin, take a lot of snaps at left tackle, and we're seeing Phil take a lot of snaps at right tackle. And Ethan is swinging and doing a good job. So, we'll see, again, by this week, again, we'll have more and more snaps, more and more information, and go from there.
Phillips kind of pushed ahead of Ethan at this point.
We'll see this week. We'll see. Yeah, I mean, there's enough on film to lead us to believe that we can win with both guys. Who ends up starting, we'll see.
Oh, I didn't have my hand up, but I'll ask a question. Sure. So Ryan, as far as things, you mentioned that next week is you kind of last week before game week. I mean, what are the things that you have to settle up before you get to actual game prep mode?
Well, I think what you're trying to do is you're trying to figure out what your identity is, but you're also, you don't call it a laboratory. There's probably like 15 to 20% laboratory of like, all right, can we do this? Are we able to, look at some different things? Yeah, we have a little bit of time to do that, but we also want to know what our identity is. We also get to get back to fundamentals because we know how important that's going to be in the first game. And so, by the time we get to next week, we're still working on fundamentals. We're still going good on good, but we're starting to really, dive into game plan stuff 2 weeks out. So it's also good to install things that you're going to need down the road that you may not need in the first week. So, you're building those things up so that when you can pull them out mid-season, you have some stuff on film that you can work off of. Guys have physically done it, body repped it. That's an important part of the preseason.
When you go into a first scrimmage in fall camp, when you have a quarterback battle, it doesn't sound like you went into this thinking that you're going to find your starter at the first scrimmage. Maybe you wanted to have multiple scrimmages. So what did you want to learn about Julian and Lincoln in scrimmages in fall camp versus what you're maybe seeing in the spring?
Well, I think everything gets ramped up when you get to the preseason. We're installing in the spring. It's offense versus defense, and not every play is designed to attack certain coverages and things like that. You want to do that a little bit when you get into the preseason to see how they're able to respond to that and handle that and be a competitive excellence. And so, it's much different when you're just doing 7-on-7 and throwing and catching the ball, as opposed to everything that comes with the game planning. And as you find yourself later and later into the preseason, guys have seen routes before, they've seen things, so you have to adjust, and then you got to go put it on the field in scrimmage settings. And so it's more game-like, and we want to see guys perform.
What are you seeing from Jalen and Malik in this thing? Where is that?
I think Caleb certainly runs the show back there. He communicates well. He has a certain level of confidence that I think rubs off on the other guys, communicating and getting everybody on the same page. And I think that's, starting to show in both Jalen and Malik and Leroy and the guys back there, in their play. So we were able to tackle a bunch on Saturday, which was good. And, we'll kind of, see how this week goes, but we're seeing growth from those guys on the back end. We're going to need them. It's an important position, as you know.
I know that no quarterback competition that you manage is the same year to year. You also talk about like your experience over multiple years handling these. When you go through this one, is there one in your mind that you could compare what you're dealing with right now to any other point here? Yeah,
actually, I remember kind of what, with Dwayne and Joe, it was similar, just in terms of, the skill sets and, their makeups. And so, it's interesting to see, those two guys compete with each other. Like you said, nothing is exactly the same, but it's similar in certain ways, but ultimately it comes down to how they perform on the field.
In 22, when you had that big opener against Notre Dame to start the year, you already had a starting quarterback returning and CJ, and to have an opener with that sort of magnitude, while simultaneously you're trying to pick quarterbacks who are going to be new. What effect does that have in terms of the timeline or process to have that game kind of breathing down your neck?
Well, we have two guys that are getting the reps, so that's good. It's not like we're getting 3 or 4. And there's so many reps in practice. We've taken that into consideration. We're trying to get both guys ready to go win the game. I think we have to have them both ready to play in that first game. And then again, as we get closer here, we'll name a starter and go from there. But we're going to need them both. And that's the goal right now, is just to get them both ready to go, figure out what they can do. That's similar. Try to figure out what they can do that's different from each other. And then so that they can go play well in this first game, because this will be their first start. Lincoln played in the bowl game, but he didn't start. And, and Julian's never started a game. So, we got to make sure we're giving them things that they can do that fit their skill set.
Right behind him, Jeremy Birmingham.
Right, relative to your own expectations, understanding you lost a lot of players on offense and defense, is there one side of the ball, or maybe just your assessment of both sides of the ball? Are you ahead of where you thought you'd be? Are you behind where you thought you'd be? How do you stack them up versus what you expected coming off of a lot of attrition, but also a national championship?
I think some days, you feel like and then other days you feel like you don't know, because there's so many new faces out there, on the field and coaches as well. And it's just different. I had a coach who I know well, came and watched practice, and he said, "Man, you guys are good." He goes, "You're different than last year, very different." He goes, "You're good. Last year's team was really good. Obviously, you won the whole thing, but this year's team's really good too. They're just different, And I agree. I think that we are different. Just different guys, different personality, edgy, competitive. But a lot of these guys haven't played a lot, so it's a different feel. It's a different personality. And so I think as we continue to forge our identities here on offense and defense, and then the first game will come and go, and then we'll identify what the issues are coming out of that game, which will give us some unbelievable feedback. And then, we'll continue to build out throughout the season and build from there. So, again, to answer your question, I think some days you feel like, okay, I have an idea what's going on here. If we're ahead or behind, I won't get into that. And then other days I'm not sure, because everything's so new. But I'll tell you, the guys are working. If you go out there and watch practice, everybody on that field is working. And, there's a lot of energy out there at practice. Guys are competitive. And if that's the case, then we can work with that.
When you talk about kind of quarterbacks and trying to simulate experience, I guess as best as you can, simulate real games, like how much does it help for Lincoln and Julian to have Carson Hinton in there, someone who has played a ton of games for you guys?
Yeah, important. It's important to have guys like Carnell and Jeremiah, to have guys like, Carson, even Luke and Austin have played in games before. And I think coming out of the playoffs, there's got to be a lot of confidence for those guys who, went into the, biggest stage and most competitive environment there was, and performed well in one game. So anytime you have guys that have been around, Will Kazmarek's played football for us, and, Bennett's played some, having guys around that have done it before. It's, even, Brandon Ennis didn't play a whole ton last year, but he's played. He made a huge catch in the national championship game. So anytime you have guys around that have done it before, it kind of gives everybody confidence, and then you just go do it, and like I try to tell these guys all the time, everybody had to do it for the first time. Everybody had that start, and you go, and sometimes you never feel like you're ready. You just got to go do it. And if you can do it consistently against the guys that we're doing it every day in practice, you got to have confidence knowing you can do it against the opponent, because, we have as good a player as anybody in the country.
You said last week that you felt like the offensive line is maybe in the best shape you've seen it since you've been here, just in terms of the number of guys you think could be able to play. Did you feel that way coming out of spring, or when did that realization start to hit you, and what are some of the markers of that, I guess, that make you feel?
Well, I think you need guys like Gabe, you need guys like Ian to really step up into that, that role of being able to play in games. And so, we are deep. The most important thing is that the 5 starting guys are executing at a high level and doing their job, but I do think the depth is strong, which is great. It's great for competition. But the guys who are the starters have to perform. And I think that's another thing that we've challenged this team with, is the starters and, the leaders, they have to take on the role of the starters, and they have to perform at a high level. They have to produce. No longer can you sit back and let the starter do all the work, and you come up and play 15, 20 plays a game and be the guy in the back. You have to, we've talked about this before, carry the water, man. You got to do all the work. You got to, take on the burden of what it means to be a starter at Ohio State. And there's a lot that comes with that. I mean, you're expected to dominate at your position. So it's good to have depth, which I think we do have. And I think that's a good thing. The question is, like, how well are we going to perform, and how much are we going to dominate? and that's to be told. And so that's not just at that position, that's at every position.
Report this week that you guys hired Josh Boyer. I guess just what into that process, how much did Matt push for that, and will his role kind of be like Matt being up the box, or Josh being up the box, kind of feed into Matt? I like to add into.
We haven't really got into exactly what game day will be like, but actually, so Josh came in here in the spring. I knew Josh. Obviously, Matt worked with Josh and had a lot of respect for him as a coach, as a person. I think he's very, very intelligent. And actually, Josh is going to kind of help me a lot on offense and some of the things that he can do. So he's going to kind of go back and forth a little bit. We're going to kind of really iron out some of those things in terms of game day. But having somebody with his background can really help me on offense and identifying, what's going on the other side of the ball, with different structures. But he's also going to help Matt as well. So just a veteran guy that has a tremendous amount of experience, really intelligent, and I think he fits our culture. So fortunate that we can add him this late. Such a quality guy.
Ryan, back to the secondary. Last year we saw Jermaine eventually work himself into the rotation. Do you see what would it take? Are you seeing the possibilities of rotation at safety or corner this year?
Well, just to talk about Jermaine, I just see so much growth in Jermaine in terms of maturity. He's a very emotional player, but he's learned to keep those emotions in check. And now he's playing with emotion. He's not letting it play with him. And, he's getting, more and more mature, more and more experienced every day. And he's become a great teammate. He builds up guys around him. If he sees something, he calls it out. I got a lot of respect for the way that he does that. He doesn't just let it go. And so, he's become one of our leaders, maybe a little bit unexpectedly, but he leads with his heart. He loves his teammates. He loves Ohio State. He loves the state of Ohio. And, he's fun to be around every day. In terms of rotation, we'll see. How many guys do we feel like we can win with? The answer to that question will dictate how many guys are actually rotating in the back end. And we haven't decided that quite yet. The competition continues.
Just trying to get some clarification. We know that Austin has earned one of those 5 spots just from the way that you've talked. Is his primary position now left tackle, or is it right tackle? I mean, because I think most people expected Ethan to be your left tackle. Where's kind of that stand right now?
Yeah, we haven't decided any positions. We usually don't set the depth chart really until a couple weeks out. So we'll wait till then to actually set the depth chart. But right now, Austin's working exclusively at left tackle.
Yeah, non-camp, non-depth chart question. You're right. So the dispatch ran a poll during the season. Always dangerous. And here's one of the questions.
Mm-hmm.
How would you rate Ryan Day's 6 years as head coach? Excellent, 54.5%. Above average, 39.6. Average, 3.4. Below average, 1.3. Poor, 1.3. I don't know what you did to the 1.3. But
Probably cut him off on 315 the other day.
How does that make you feel to hear 95% think that you're doing either excellent or above average when late last November you could flip those numbers?
I think you just come to the realization when you're in this position, you just have to have thick skin. You can't worry about those types of things. You have to stand on the principles and values that you believe in. You know what the expectation is, and then you just go from there. And when it's all said and done, I've said this before, you have to win games, but winning games just allows us to continue to do what we love here. And, we know what that expectation is. I know what that expectation is, and the responsibility of running a first-class program and doing things the right way, caring about people and winning championships. And that's it. I mean, that's the focus. And so every single day, that's my job and that's the coach's job to continue to drive this building to do that. So that when we all get together on Saturdays, in Ohio and throughout the country, we're proud of the Buckeyes. And it takes everybody. I've said that before. It takes everybody. It takes the red coats at the game. It takes all the fans at home who are watching it through the TV, who are sending great energy. It takes the fans who are supporting the players. It takes the people in town who support the players in good times and in bad. I mean, it takes, the guys in this room who support our team. And I mean, it takes everybody. And that's what's special about Ohio State. And, my job, everyone has to do their job. Everybody has to do their job on the field. The kicker's got to make the field goal. The defensive end's got to rush the passer. The quarterback's got to throw the ball. The kicker doesn't need to know how to block. You just got to kick balls. Everyone has to do their job. And, my job is to be the head coach and just drive it and keep pushing and make sure we take care of these young men. One of the things I think we lose focus on is that this game, we're still developing young men, and this game still has unbelievable lessons to learn from and grow from. And, the character of the guys in that locker room is something we take very, very serious. And I think that anybody who's around our players, who get a chance to interview our players, to get a chance to see them around town, know the type of people that we have and the expectation of holding themselves to a higher standard, because that's what it means to be a Buckeye. And so, my children really don't remember anywhere else. They remember moving to Ohio, and this is what they've known going on 9 years. And so, it's in our blood and it's who we are. No. No. We didn't open up with Texas, maybe. But you want to take a deep breath. I mean, the first game is a monster right out of the gate. And, I'll just say this, we're excited about playing in that game. I know Buckeye Nation is fired up. It is going to be an unbelievable atmosphere. And I'm not going to get into it now because we're just under 3 weeks away, but we need the shoe rocking, just like it was for the Indiana game, just the way it was for the Penn State game, a couple years ago. They can't get away with the clap. I mean, we got to bring it to put them on silent cadence. It's got to be the loudest it's ever been, and what an unbelievable atmosphere it's going to be. And so, we remind our players that like this game is here. You can't all of a sudden just get fired up the week of the game. Like we're playing that game right now, every single moment. And so, even while I'm here, I got to get back and watch film because we got work to do.
Yeah, Coach, we didn't get to attend Saturday. If I could just ask, were there 2 to 3 guys each side of the ball who you were happy with how they graded out? Just, I know you don't want to leave anybody out,
right,
but just were there anybody who just you thought really made a good step on Saturday?
We did a champions meeting, so we called some guys out. Some guys graded out champions, other guys didn't. There's a lot that goes into that first scrimmage, and it's hard to make a ton of evaluations out of the scrimmage. And again, like you said, if I said one person, then somebody else is gonna feel slighted. So I try not to do that. I apologize, and I know you're looking for some names right now, but we'll get there. We'll get to the depth chart hopefully here by the end of the week, and have an idea who those guys are that are stepping up and playing well.
Ryan, I know there's competition at every position all over the field, but just in particular when you have quarterback competition and what you guys have going on the offensive line, and not that anyone's won anything, but Austin has clearly impressed people. Just whether it's quarterback or left tackle, what's it like when you really see a guy make a move? Or for a coaching staff in the process to watch somebody really seize their moment or start stacking days, and how do you evaluate that?
Well, you look at trends. I feel like football is a game of trends. You're never going to know 100% of what it is. It's like game planning. Like you don't know what's going to happen, but you got to play the trends. You got to play the numbers and then adjust from there. When you watch somebody in the off season go through, the weight room with Mick, the guy's seen it all. I mean, you talk about the best in a business. It's not close. Mick Marotti is the best in a business at building leadership, at building toughness, accountability, all those things. And when he stamps them, when he's an Iron Buckeye, you got a chance. I mean, Jeremiah Smith was the first freshman, I think, ever to be an Iron Buckeye. He was one. What happened, right? Austin Saraville becomes an Iron Buckeye. Look what's happening. So for us, the backbone of our program is what happens in the offseason in that weight room. That is our chopping wood and carrying water in the weight room. And so when you start to see that happen, you can almost predict what's going to come next. Have there been guys who have done really well, been gold and Iron Buckeyes that haven't played a lot? Yeah, but not many. Those are usually the guys that find a way to get on that field. And so, I say it all the time. If you want to be successful here at Ohio State, grab onto Mick and be an Iron Buckeye and be a gold guy. And so I think we had just over 40% of our team gold, which is not easy to do. I think last year we were right around 43. I think this year we're right there too. And that's a good sign. So, you're starting to see some of those guys separate who put all that work in the offseason. Thanks, guys. Yep.